Next, we will have Dr. Howard Skip Burris. Dr. Burris serves as President and Chief Medical Officer of the Sarah Cannon Research Institute, as well as the Executive Director, Drug Development for the Research Institute. He is an associate of Tennessee Oncology, where he practices medical oncology, and he is also the President-elect of ASCO. Dr. Burris will be talking about leveraging organizational culture and leadership to promote change. Skip.
Thank you very much, Bob. Appreciate the kind introduction. And I've got a few more slides than I planned, but it's really sort of a show and tell. And I think some of Dr. Paz's comments resonate in terms of thinking about investments in navigation. His comments about the number of tests that order. Another place we're making some investments is in this area of helping our physicians and even the patients understand the results that are coming back from next generation sequencing, for example. And then also some comments about the patient satisfaction experience and taking care of patients in the communities where they live. So, you know, the more we can do closer to home, obviously that's going to result in better patient satisfaction if done with the quality and the speed that's necessary. As Bob said, I help head an organization called Sarah Cannon. It has built its reputation on clinical research, but about 8 years ago, actually through a variety of issues, ended up becoming a wholly owned subsidiary of HCA Healthcare, the large hospital company. And so you see the tagline at the top, the Cancer Institute of HCA, which plays in a little bit to some of the investments we've made, because now part of our responsibilities are the cancer service line across the country. Just a real quick disclosure statement. No personal conflicts. Sarah Cannon, all research funding from pharma biotech and all consulting advisory fees roll to the institution. The institutional leaders are all salaried employees. So I think some of the basics that we look at in terms of how we're attempting to leverage up and to help our CAREFORCE in order to have everybody practicing at the top of their license, to use a buzz phrase. One is a technology investment. I'll talk a little bit about patient ID, which is a natural language processing artificial intelligence ontology initiative to really help with radiology reports and pathology reports and the like. There's much to talk about here, probably better in the question and answer session. And then NavQ, also built on a software program called iNavigate, which is a in-house developed navigation software program. And I'll talk a little bit about the investment in the nurse navigators that we've made. On the personnel side, our nurse navigator is a little bit different than what you typically think about at a cancer center. And as I mentioned, I'll go into that in some detail. The investment in nurse navigation is an unreimbursable activity, but it has yielded great benefits in terms of efficiencies, in terms of the patient experience, and actually in terms of the physician experience. And then the advanced practice providers, primarily nurse practitioners throughout our programs. But that's been a huge key to our success in a number of areas. One being in some of the high-risk programs we're developing, which I won't have time to go into today. And then on the process point, trying to do things where we can to streamline things. There's been a large initiative around pathways. And then very specifically, I want to mention today, one of the real struggles for the community oncologist is the molecular information. So our molecular cancer conferences as one example. All this being done, we continue to try to resonate and talk about in each of the meetings and each of the description of the data being generated that we've got to do this while we're improving speed and quality, that we're reducing redundancy and waste, and that we're increasing patient satisfaction. And owing a little bit to Dr. Paz's comments, again, one of the costs to the system is as patients move through, particularly in a community setting. When you think about a large tertiary academic hospital, you might go from the first floor to the fourth floor to the ninth floor, as opposed to most of the United States in community practice, you're getting in your car and going to a different clinic that very well likely has a different electronic record, which results in frustration on not getting the results, that results in a test being reordered, which is simpler and crazy. So this is the scope and scale of my program, of the Sarah Cannon program. HCA is the second largest provider of health care behind the federal government. Now that's only about a 6 or 7% market share for the country. That just shows you how fragmented things are. 30 million plus visits a year, and actually north of 100,000 cancer diagnoses across the enterprise. The blue are the states where there's hospital facilities. The circles are where there's Sarah Cannon core markets where we've made investments in the cancer infrastructure. And then you see our research, clinical research sites, phase 1 programs and the like, the bone marrow transplant centers, radiation oncology, and then we continue to support some of the cardiovascular initiatives. A good time to mention the fact that in working with HCA and having Sarah Cannon wholly owned as a subsidiary, but very much carved out, it's because cancer is such a unique disease. And I know the non-cancer folks at some of these meetings get frustrated about hearing that cancer is special or different or unique or complicated. But the fact is, transactional medicine, and I don't mean to diminish anything about some of these transactional things, but having a hip replacement or any other joint replacement, having a baby delivered, having a valve replaced, or all those procedures that are 24 to 72-hour processes, much easier for a system like HCA to get their hands around and think about how to really hone in, as opposed to cancer, when did it really start? And it never ends. And then there's that treatment phase in the middle. But we all have talked about, you talked about yesterday, some of the survivorship issues. So navigation, when we came and presented to the Moonshot team at Vice President Biden's program, they were amazed by the investment in navigation. And this was quite a sell in terms of return on investment for this program. So on the left side of the slide, the focus of our navigation programs are from diagnosis to getting your treatment started. That part where you get the scary word, you might or do have cancer, there's a biopsy, a suspicious finding, and then getting you through the system in this community program to your first treatment, be that surgical, medical, radiation, oncology. And on the right side are what we teach our navigators about the mission here, developing trust, not just with the patients, which is often very easy with the nurses, but the physicians understanding you're not getting in their way, you're there to make things go better. Education, providing emotional support, improving access, and advocating for the patient's voice. I will tell you, having seen patients before navigation and after navigation, a patient that comes to my clinic who's been navigated is much better educated, much better informed, a much more intelligent conversation, and it makes the visit so much more productive. It used to be pre-navigation, we sort of started with cancer, CAN, CER, and now we're actually at a place where we're having a meaningful conversation about the treatment options from the very first visit. This starts with an investment in natural language processing. The patient ID process is an investment in ontology and AI to actually go through radiology and pathology reports. As you can imagine, pathology diagnoses in the community come from all sorts of places: ambulatory surgery centers, physicians' offices, interventional radiology at a variety of hospitals. So picking up and identifying a cancer patient is the first step in this. And these are processed, and each morning the nurse navigators can push a button on their computer and see who in the system needs to be addressed. And actually, no credit to me, to our team, they now have it at a place where it's sorted, not perfectly, but in a degree of complexity. So a patient with a more urgent issue, as opposed to maybe, and nothing, stage 1 colon cancer is important, but we're handling that a little differently than the patient who might have a more complicated stage 3 lung cancer or rectal cancer problem. The other part of this story is the radiology reports, where we're actually using natural language processing for when something is suspicious. I always joke that you get a CT scan in the ER, so it makes it seem like your wait isn't so long. But the fact is, most people in the United States that go into the ER for whatever reason end up getting imaging, and it's often a scan. And having this patient ID program overread these radiology reports so that patients who need follow-up or biopsy are handled. So it's sorted to the navigators, and the process starts. We're just getting going with this. There's over 200 navigators. It's a $15 million investment. They cover 14 divisions or markets across the U.S., covering 8 disease sites for right now. heavy focus on breast, complex GI, which we describe as pancreatic cancer, cholangio, the non-colon issues, the colon cancer, which is actually many times being handled at the stage 1-2 level with an evaluation and then what we call virtual navigation, making sure that the patient's got appropriate follow-up so that they get their next colonoscopy, their next test, their next appointment, not needing the heavy touch of somebody who might be getting a more complicated surgery. GYN, heme, lung, neuro, and sarcoma. So those are just some of the things, and those are the markets that are listed here. These are some of the diseases we focused on. Obviously, much more work to do, but a huge investment, but has yielded great results. The left side of the slide is a busy slide that basically the math here shows that on the left side, prior to having the patient ID program coupled with the navigator to get rid of some of the paperwork and serve it up, we had 70% of the navigator's time spent on administrative tasks. The right side of that top part shows that, in fact, now 65% of their time is spent with the patient or the physician. So we flipped the ratio of paperwork to actually interacting with the patient. And how does this pay off? You can see volume growth and out-migration on the right. We see that we retain patients. I mean, patients are then satisfied with the process. We streamline their workup and the flow, and that's really the underlying result. It's also, by other measurements, we've attracted surgical talent. A surgeon in our program that said they were loyal to us actually meant they did 2/3 of their surgeries at our facility, as opposed to now with navigation and the process put in place, a loyalist is now more like 90% of their surgeries are done in our facility, which helps also with volume, increase the quality of, and across the bottom, you see some of the other things we're looking to measure. Part of it's patient satisfaction, and then time to first treatment, making sure that things are being done quickly. This is just a quick comment about the pathway story. I won't go into this in detail. Complex GI pathways and thoracic pathways. In the gray are pre-navigation, pre-having the pathway put in place, and the blue is where the pathway's been put in place. A couple highlights for this in terms of complex GI and thoracic. In our major pancreatic surgery centers, we actually had a 0 open and close rate in 2018, which is far different than 5 years ago, which simply means that the patient was worked up and staged appropriately, that they didn't have an unnecessary exploration when they weren't resectable. And on the thoracic side, much of that discussion has been simply now, instead of having that lung nodule picked up through the ER and quickly moved into a resection that might or might not be staged appropriately, we now have almost all the lung patients in the community being discussed at multidisciplinary conferences. And there's certainly a lot of options for these early stage lung cancer patients. And then at the bottom right on the breast side, just really the pathology, now raising the equation to get BRCA testing done and to make sure that HER2 status is known before surgery. I just put this slide in here to comment. ASCO is taking a major initiative in terms of leveraging high-quality pathways, not attempting to be the source of pathway development, but advocating that pathway implementation is certainly going to be a way to develop high-quality care, save money, decrease redundancy, sort of call us to a higher standard as we use evidence-based medicine. So certainly this is a nice way to be able to measure adherence and to make sure that everybody's participating and moving patients through the system in a fairly uniform fashion. So then let me shift gears and just spend a few minutes on personalized medicine. Large academic institutions, certainly our community practitioners, the struggle with what to do with all this molecular information. And certainly this is a problem, and the solution is not going to be to have every community oncologist become a molecular expert. That's just not going to happen. This is in the news. I put this slide up there just because the patients ask about it now. They come in the door wanting to know, start with the ones that are 23andMe and Ancestry.com, and then move it into all the things that are going on in the world of Foundation Medicine and Garden and Tempest and Caris and all this testing. And while it's debatable, I think all of us in the field, if we had cancer or a loved one with cancer, knowing the molecular profile of your tumor is something you're going to want to know. We just have to figure out when to do it, how to pay for it, and how it rolls. This is the challenge of precision medicine. You see a lot of slides this direction. These mutations are all occurring in a small number of patients on a percentage, but when they add up, it certainly becomes part of the story that goes into decision making. And then these are found, you know, you don't get one back for one patient, right? You're getting a few or a dozen or very high tumor mutational loads. So really, really difficult. And ASCO actually, after a couple of years of touting the advances of immunotherapy, actually brought up for the advance of the year this past year is the progress in treating rare cancers. You know, if you add together the 1% or less of these incident types of cancer, it adds up to be about 15 or 20% of all cancers. So in the midst of your seeing breast, lung, colon, prostate, you actually have about 1 in 6 patients would fall into a category of having a rare cancer. So on the left is the kind of information that an NGS company can give back to you. In the middle is the fact that our physicians understand that the biology of the tumor is complex and that understanding how that alteration would affect the treatment decision is key. And then on the right is the synthesized down deliverable molecular report, which still doesn't really get you to where you need to be if you're seeing patients every 15 or 20 minutes in a busy practice and beginning to learn about all the things that might pertain to that. So our high-level vision to try to help the physicians here has been to scientifically advise, to minimize the barriers for the physicians, both in ordering and in test interpretation. We have a very democratic access to technologies. They can order whatever they'd like to order with some guidance and suggestions, and then trying to tailor standard therapy or participation in a trial. Every night, on the left side here, every night in from all the molecular profiling labs, Foundation, Garden, Caris, the Tempest, the like, the data comes back in to our GENOSPACE system. Every night, the physician's oncology records, the EMR records, come back into the GENOSPACE system. So we've bet on and invested in and acquired GENOSPACE, a bioinformatics company out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, to aggregate and prepare that data really for clinical decision support. So obviously a large multi-million-dollar investment, but rather than bet on the technology of sequencing, we've decided that the best thing we can do for our physicians and our patients and our care providers is actually to figure out how to help them handle the data. And so this has been our initiative. This is a de-identified, just example patient. A physician, more commonly the nurse for the physician, looks up Mr. Washington, sees what actually was identified as potentially actionable or of an interesting mutation. Are there trial options, and what would be the standard of care options that might or might not be appropriate for this patient? So this is sort of the screened down version of it. And then we also have a variety of molecular oncology support services. There's routine cancer conferences being held for the practices, attempting to use representative cases. There's also email feedback for particular insights seen about a physician's cases, and we've got PhD molecular specialists that are working on this. And then there's also the on-call concierge service that goes into this. It sounds like a lot. The doctors tend to be quiet on the cancer conferences because this is much information they're not as familiar with. They greatly appreciate the email transactions back and forth. And then I think we need to see some acceleration in terms of the on-call concierge piece. That's not quite where it needs to be yet. We certainly can provide the service. We just need physicians to have the time to call and have the conversation. So that's our investments. I think the overarching themes here are to try to better inform our patients, much with the navigation side of things, and our physicians, both in terms of the navigators helping to stage, use pathways, and ensure compliance, decrease redundancies, going to lead to better utilization experiences. We are focusing heavy on synthesizing the information. The information coming at the nurses and the physicians is overwhelming with what's there and available to us. So how we can streamline that for our care providers is certainly a big part of the investment. And we're trying to use technology where practical and possible. As much as we can, get it down to where it fits into their workflow, part of the EMR or part of their smartphone applications. So thank you very much for the time and the opportunity to come speak, and I look forward to the discussion.